I felt that he could see straight into my soul, and that inspired the whole song. That song is the band's biggest hit, still to this day. Hey, I'm Jade, and this is Backline Beats Turn It Up Tuesday. And this one is for my angsty teen self. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Now let's get into it. This week's album, Evanescence's Fallen. In 1995, a 14-year-old Amy Lee met a 15-year-old Ben Moody at a Christian camp, where the two bonded over the fact that they felt that they really didn't fit into their surroundings. So their mutual love for music turned into them making music together. The two were interested in creating music that bent genres like heavy metal and rock with classical and cinematic music. Though it wasn't easy to do that with the equipment that the two teenagers had access to. They mixed everything together on a 16-track recorder that Amy Lee had, but getting all the string sounds and all the band sounds, they didn't really have access to that and used digital effects. And this was in the 90s. Digital effects weren't the greatest effects, but even just getting that equipment was tough. They began playing as a duo in their hometown of Little Rock, Arkansas, every few months at cafes and bookstores. They finally settled on the name Evanescence after using basically whatever name that came to mind when someone said what your name was. The names including Childish Intentions and Stricken. The first demo that the two made was in 1997 and included an early version of the song My Immortal. They were focused on just remaining a duo and bringing in other band members when it was needed, but in 1999, they added a third member in the form of David Hodges. It was their second demo, which was a full-length demo that was titled Origins, that gave them their break, which also had another version of My Immortal, and it was a version that was recorded in the radio station that Amy Lee's father had worked at. The song caught the attention of Diane Meltzer at Wind Up Records, who ended up signing the band. The label actually moved the band first to New York and then to Los Angeles, where they ended up being there for a couple of years, writing and working on the album. Well, they mostly stayed there for a few years. See, the band had a clear idea of what they wanted their sound to be, and not everyone at the label was on board. See, nu metal was really popular during this time, and having two vocalists, kind of a singer and a rapper at the same time. And so the label kept on insisting that there needed to be a co-vocalist that had to be male, because they thought no one would listen to just a female-fronted rock band, because there wasn't a lot at this time, especially successful mainstream bands. But the band outright refused to bring that co-male vocalist in. So they essentially kind of died on that hill. They packed their bags and headed back to Arkansas. Finally, the label relented, saying, okay, there doesn't have to be a co-male vocalist except on one song. That song being Bring Me to Life, because they had a chance for it to be in a movie. That movie being Daredevil with Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner. And the only way that would happen would be if there was a guy also singing in it. But more on that later. The butting of heads with Wind Up didn't end there. The recording of My Immortal for the third time, their best time, like the exact version that they wanted, the studio made the band use the Origins version, of which the band kind of hated that version. Specifically, Amy Lee, who hated her voice in it. She thought that she sounded like a child and too young in that. It wasn't actually just unpleasantness between the studio and the band, but within the band itself, with Lee and Moody essentially becoming just business partners at this point. Like, they weren't friends, they didn't hang out. They wrote their parts separately and then came together to just put everything together to make whatever song that they were working on. One of the other processes the band had to go through during this time, specifically Amy Lee, was performance training. Lee had just at that time, up until that point, just kind of stood at the mic and sang with her eyes closed. But the label needed her to have more stage presence, so they set her up with an acting coach where she would have to stand in the room and sing to him and lock eyes with him until it finally clicked for her, of kind of bringing that presence, bringing the feel of the song out and through her. It was in December 2002 that they finished the album. Hey, just popping in here to say, if you like what you see so far, I'd love if you hit that subscribe button. Now back to the video. On March 4th, 2003, Evanescence's debut album, Fallen, was dropped. By this time, though, Hodges was gone. The album was an instant success, which validated the band's insistence on doing it their way, making the music that they wanted, and not playing what the label and even the radio stations were telling them that they needed to play in order to be successful. It sold nearly 150,000 copies in the first week, and by April it sold 1 million in the US. That was just a month later. And by January of 2004, it was 4 million. And it's continued to sell to this day, and in November 2022, it sold its 10 millionth copy. The album spent 114 weeks on the Billboard 200, and it was successful not just in the US, but in other countries around the world as well. And after 3 months in the top 10 on the Canadian charts, it actually hit number 1. The album brought the band 2 Grammys, one for Best New Artist and one for Best Hard Rock Performance. They were also nominated for Best Album, Rock Song, Rock Album, and Pop Performance for Duo or Group. After the album was released, it was time for the singles. The first up was Bring Me to Life, which dropped a month after the release of the album. Though it had already been released with the aforementioned Daredevil, which came out in theaters on February 14th. As for that co-male vocalist on a song, it was this one, and it came in the form of Paul McCoy of 12 Stones. Lee actually had to write a new part specifically just for him, as she had written the song when she was 19 years old, about the song being about a bad point in her life where she was in a bad relationship and just she wasn't happy, and she ran into someone who was like an acquaintance, a friend of a friend type of guy. And he looked at her and asked her if she was happy, and she couldn't believe that he could see it because she thought she had been doing such a good job hiding it all this time. Saying, "I felt like he could see straight into my soul." That inspired the whole song. That guy actually ended up becoming her husband, where they married in 2007. It was this song that the label took to radio stations to try to get airplay, but the radio stations refused to, saying that nobody would listen to a chick singing rock songs, especially with a piano in it. That's when the idea formed about getting a male vocalist to go along with Amy Lee, because at this time nu metal was very popular. The song was a hit, peaking in the top 10 in multiple countries, and sold 1 million copies in the US within the year, and to date is sold 4 million worldwide. In the video, director Philip Stutzel was worried that it would take too long going back and forth between Lee and his stunt double, because they didn't have a lot of time to do the video. But his worries were for naught, because Lee actually ended up doing all her own stunts, and in the point of the video where she's hanging onto McCoy's arm, she had to do that for hours and apparently just never got tired. This song won the Grammy for Best Hard Rock Performance and was also nominated for Best Rock Song. It took 4 months for the next single to be released. It happened on August 18th, 2003, and the song was Going Under. While the song failed to chart, critics noted that this was the song that basically ensured that Evanescence wouldn't become one-hit wonders. It was a great song, maybe didn't hit the zeitgeist quite as much as Bring Me to Life, but no one was gonna say, okay, remember just that one song. The video is shot in Berlin with the same director as Bring Me to Life. And Amy Lee actually designed the outfits for the video, even sewing the white dress she wears underwater in her hotel room one night. There are actually lists out there that call this one of the creepiest videos of all time, which is in stark contrast to the next single, the already often mentioned My Immortal, which was released on December 8th, 2003. It was actually Moody who wrote the song when he was only 16 years old, and actually by this time, the time that this song was released, he was no longer in the band, having left in the middle of a tour. Him and Lee's relationship had completely deteriorated to the point where they could no longer work together. This is actually the only song Lee hasn't wrote any lyrics on. She's credited as a writer because she wrote the music to it. While it was the label's choice for what went onto the album, the single/music video version was the version that the band wanted. And on later CDs, and if you go streaming now, there's the two versions on the album. It was in the top 10 in over 10 countries, even topping the list in a few, including here in Canada. Is also another song that ended up being featured in Daredevil. The video was shot in the Gothic Quarter in Barcelona, and in 2005 was nominated for the Best Pop Vocalist Duo or Group. Over a year after the album's release, Everybody's Fool came out as the last single on May 31st, 2004. Lee wrote the song in 1999 about the unrealistic expectations of beauty and sexuality and kind of the pop star craze at the time. This came to her after she saw the influence it had on her younger sister. She's since kind of drifted from the song and the message and kind of looks at the song as a kind of a moment in her time, kind of what she thought at that time. Though if Amy Lee had it her way, this actually wouldn't have been the last single, but it would have been the song Imaginary. It hit the top 40 in 14 countries. And actually, when Lee looks back on the video, which was directed again by Philip Stutzel, she can't help laugh at scenes, especially this one. Well, it was a tumultuous time for the band, with Amy Lee being the only one left standing of the three who started the album. Once Fallen's cycle had finished, it ended up being worth it. And Amy Lee has even talked about how tough it was at times. She actually looks back on this time more fondly than not. Fallen and the band left an indelible mark. Their influence of breaking through the male-dominated genre can be seen today. While maybe not on the overall charts, where rock and kind of rock-adjacent music has a tough enough time in general breaking through, you don't have to look far to see that there's no shortage of female-fronted bands in the rock world. The album itself is more than just its singles. It's top to bottom a great listen. So grab it off your shelf or open your favorite music app and listen to this week's album, Evanescence's Fallen. I hope you liked the video, and if you're new here, you could check out our other videos here, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks, and have yourself a good one.